Hey everyone, it's Zeffy and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing my Persona 5 to Phantom X Global 1.0 tier list before 1.1 comes out and the new units will come out. And I am ready to ruffle some feathers. And I'm not talking about Lufel as well. Nah, I'm kidding. I'm not actually going to ruffle any feathers. Well, actually, I don't know. This is all based on my opinion, my subjective opinion. And I'm going to try and look at everything objectively in terms of each unit's power level, or at least their perceived power level in my eyes. And I'll be coming at this from the standpoint of mostly sort of end game content, but I will throw in caveats in there for story-based content and just general gameplay as well, and I guess general comfiness for certain units as well. I think you might know what I'm talking about and what discourse has actually filtered through online. But as you can see here, I'm looking at the Pride 1 tier list, which I think for Global is actually not too bad. I will be talking a little bit about the other regions, so if you, I guess, don't want spoilers on characters coming, then this is probably not the correct tier list for you. But I won't go into any of the story detail or anything like that. I'll just purely be naming the units and why I think they might be a little bit better depending on the units that I talk about in this tier list. So I do welcome sort of different opinions, and of course I welcome all the comments. So definitely, feel free to flame me, feel free to say my list is shit, whatever, or feel free to agree with me. I know these tier lists can be very contentious, so go for it, whatever you want to do. Again, this is subjective, and I guess your tier list is subjective as well. But let's just have some fun. Let's see how good each of the units are, and then we'll go from there. So if you do enjoy this video, definitely don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a bunch. Don't forget to tune into the live streams. I pretty much stream every single day. And also don't forget to join the Gacha Rebels Discord, link in the description. Alrighty, so I'm going to be coming at this from a bossing run on Pride Win. And bossing basically means sort of, endgame stuff and just higher tier boss levels, especially some of the mini bosses and stuff around the other parts in the palaces, for example. I will be clicking over the general in general, I guess, and then DC and tier list as well. I'll be talking about a little bit depending on sort of the character as well. So we'll get into it straight away. I will be going over sort of the DPS units, the sustain, support, and navigator. I'll be doing it that way. I'll be looking at the tiers that Pride wants to rank them in and see if I agree and disagree, and then see if I need to move any units to different tiers and stuff like that. So first of all, tier 0, DPS unit for bossing, Joker, definitely tier 0, 100%, because Joker is probably one of the best, probably is the best AoE DPS currently in the game. And that's probably because everything in endgame is curse-based. Basically, your guild boss battles are curse-based with Dominion, and then your I believe is it back you? And the unicorns, for example, they're curse based as well. So Ren being there, like no brainer whatsoever. It's definitely T0 for now, 100%. Super good. Can get the extra turn. Can get the very easy to get sort of Will of Rebellion stacks as well, and does a super high damage highlight. So pretty obvious that Joke's in T0, and I 100% agree with that. So next units are Arn Takamaki and Ryuji Sakamoto at tier 0.5. Now, one could argue that Arn could be possibly at tier 0 as well, just because of all the sort of the AoE basis for this particular SOS run, as well as particular guild battles, for example. So this SOS with Vishnu is obviously fire dependent, so you can clear a lot of content with Arn as well. And I've also seen in SOS on the second side with the Melchizedek boss, for example, a lot of Arn teams and a lot of fire-based Arn teams have actually been posting up really, really high scores. So you can basically, argue that 0.5. Now, in my opinion, it probably would be about 0.5. I think that's probably fair, just because like in terms of utility wise, in terms of overall output damage wise, she doesn't need sort of like a burn team. She can't really stand alone, for example. Ren, on the other hand, in my opinion, can probably stand alone. Like obviously Ren will boost the power, obviously a curse persona will boost the power as well, but Ren just does a lot of damage output in general, whereas Arn kind of just needs a little bit of boost from someone like Ki, for example. But yeah, super versatile in terms of just AoE. Levin Rose stacks you can easily get by just using a skill, essentially. And if you have Arn at A1 or A2, which I know a lot of people have, you can get basically a 25% party-wide damage increase, which just does a lot of additional damage, for example, at A1, which is super good. And that's a change that actually came to Global, which is pretty good. And Ryuji, I would agree the same thing. Ryuji is probably not in tier 0. Ryuji does a shit ton of damage, by the way, with skill 3, 100%. And then also being able to pair him with Leon, for example, to easily give him the rebound stacks, for example, to power up the move. And then obviously skill 3 got hence burst as well. You can do a lot of damage on, especially for SOS, that second part of Melchizedek as well. But again, I think he's probably fair to be 0.5 instead of 0, just because he's single target. And there's not really, besides the Melchizedek boss, there's not really other uses for Ryuji at this point in time. Eventually, you know, when content comes later, for example, single target could be in, for example, then Ryuji's value will shoot up. But at this point in time, 0.5 is really, really fair, just because in endgame he's very, very useful, especially for the second part of SOS. Now we get down here. Now, I would also argue, to be fair, that like Seiji Shiratori or Florette, for example, might actually even sort of increase into 0.5. But I guess in tier 1, just because it, you know, you need an A6 in order to be sort of like really, really good. But Shiratori can definitely do adequate damage for sure, especially second side. If you don't have Ryuji, for example, especially second side on SOS, being Melchizedek, being sort of weak to physical or wind, for example, you can definitely make Florette work for sure. But again, this is a 4-star, and generally 4 stars would be generally worse than their 5-star counterparts. And in order for Shiratori to be absolutely beast, you do need A6, which may or may not be a little bit difficult to get. But he is on the rate up 4-star for Ren, for example. So some people probably have got him at A6. I think I've got him at like A4 or something like that. But definitely solid choice, for example. Has the winded effect as well, which deals additional damage, and he can also buff his crit stats as well with his innate kit without sort of anyone else doing that for him, but also pays very, very well with units like Leon or just general buffing units as well. So I think tier 1 is a very fair assessment for Florette. Now tier 2 for Montaigne and Monoha Arai. Probably fair as well. To be perfectly honest, I haven't used these two characters too much. But in saying that, I feel like with Montaigne, there's really no need to use single target ice at this point in time. And single target in general is very, very difficult sort of to push into the higher tiers. Especially with Mont as well, considering that there's not really many ice weak end game stuff at the moment. Eventually when that comes in, for example, with Yusuke, then possibly Montaigne's on Mont's value might rise a little bit, but at this point in time, that's probably it. And I think tier 2 is just fine. Same with the Rai. It's pretty much the same thing. You don't really have many electrical stuff to do in endgame at the moment. SOS is basically just curse-based and fire-based, essentially. So these two are probably fair to be in tier 2 because they are definitely a little bit, they're definitely worse than Florette, for example, because Florette can actually do well on second side of SOS. But these two, yeah, it's a little bit up in the air at the moment. So probably fair assessment. And then there's not really much to talk about with All Mate Sepia, unfortunately. Sepia at this point in time, single target DPS. Like you may as well, in the Curse team, for example, I mean, I don't think many people are using Sepia even in the Curse team. Because Ren being AoE, and obviously got Rin here being a support character, for example, that's really all you need. And then all you really need is another support character in order to buff up Ren. There's really no need to use Sepia, and Sepia by itself, if you don't have Joker, just doesn't do enough AoE curse damage to be effective on first side SOS as well as your guild battles with the minion, for example. So being in tier 3 is definitely fair enough. I wouldn't recommend building him at all, to be perfectly honest. So I think that tier is fine. All right, so now we're going to be talking about sustains, and I'm just going to be quickly going over the set. So Shun as a sustain, everyone should be building Shun regardless. Like, I don't care what people say. He's got a weird name, you know, he's a little bit bland, blah, 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 blah. I think Shun is absolutely amazing. I think he's sick. His persona design is probably one of my favorites persona designs in this game, and he's just an overall great unit. He's got a def down. He's got additional, HP on his skills. He's also got his Desperado state as well, his wild state as well, and he's also just got, he can do crits on his gun, he can just everything. He can taunt as well, and he's also got ice-based affinity damage as well in order to hit the ice-based weaknesses, for example. Shun is a very, very, very good character, only gets significantly better with his awarenesses and gets also significantly better with his 4-star weapon, so I highly, highly recommend getting that from one of your selectors. There's really not much else to say. Super, super solid sustain just because he'll keep you alive with skill 3 100%. And it makes you that you can sort of run quote unquote a sustain list or at least a heal list team in some instances, because Shun will just keep you alive regardless, taking all the damage from your taunts, and also can give you some defense bonuses as well with a few of the skills, awarenesses, all that sort of stuff. So the next one on the list is definitely going to be Lufel. Now, a lot of people, if I can play it just general compared to bossing, for example, a lot of people have actually put Morgana and Lufel sort of either in the same tier, or as you can see here for the bossing, in significantly different tiers. Now, this is my opinion on the matter, and this is purely coming from endgame point of view, not just from a comfort point of view or just from general story or general fights. In my opinion, Lufel is better than Morgana. The only reason being is because once you slap on that revelation card set that gives additional healing, once you rank up Lufel's skill 3 and skill 2, Lufel's healing does enough. It does enough to get by to actually heal you up as well as keep you alive. It does enough, especially with all the endgame content currently, assuming that you're on level, obviously. If you're below level, then obviously, Morgana's probably going to be better. But if you're on level and you're sort of pushing for those, top 1% or guilds, top 50 guilds, for example, then Lufel will definitely be better in that instance. And it's because Lufel's kit actually has a buff in it, as well as the ult has a global buff as well. And basically every time you get the buff, you essentially get an attack increase. And being a sustain unit that heals, but also buffs as well, similar to sort of Shun in a different sort of sense, is going to be more valuable to your team than someone who just heals. Now, a lot of people were arguing that Morgana has a revive. However, yes, Morgana does have a revive. However, his revive is purely based on highlight. And if you're using the highlight to revive, then you're not using a highlight to damage, for example. You're not using Rin's highlight to increase curse damage for Ren. You can see the sort of permutations that you can do with that, for example. So in my opinion, Lufel is just better than Morgana. Now, in my opinion, however, is that the amount of comfort and the amount of, I guess, just, I don't know what you call it, like just security that you have, that you're basically never going to die with Morgana, just because Morgana's heals can crit. And whenever I get a crit heal Morgana, the dopamine rush just goes straight to my brain, and I just love that shit. And I love just having Morgana on my team to do a significant amount of heals. But again, at the end of the day, that's all Morgana does. It's just heals and then a highlight revive. The winded damage is not enough. The buffs from Starfire is significantly better than the winded debuff, for example. And then the lucky punch is exactly that. You're gonna get lucky if you get a crit. So in that regard, they definitely won't be in the same tier. Now, in saying that though, can Morgana, slot into those teams? Can you still use Morgana? 100%. I still recommend building Morgana. I still recommend choosing Morgana, because at the end of the day, some people may or may not be able to get through the story without having a significant healer like Morgana, for example, right? And saying that as well, obviously we know that Marion is coming very, very soon. In fact, Marion, I believe, is coming next patch, actually. And Marion will most likely take over the spots of Lufel as well as Morgana. Lufel probably a little bit, maybe not so much just because of the 5 affinity-based teams. But I still recommend building Morgana just because the amount of comfort that Morgana gives you in the story, and just healing-wise in general. Like, honestly, when you get to bosses that just absolutely destroy you, for example, having someone like Morgana would be, in my eyes, a bit more valuable than having someone like Lufel, for example, especially if you've already built Morgana. You might lose out on a little bit of damage, and obviously in endgame for the scores, damage is everything. But you can also argue that if you can't stay alive, then there's really no point in the additional buff damage from Lufel. So, one can make the argument, but from a purely subjective point of view, in my opinion, I do think Lufel is better than Morgana. And in the endgame content, I have been using Lufel more than Morgana, just because of the buffs purely. And Lufel actually just does enough healing for me, at least how I built Lufel, to be able to stay alive. But I still use Morgana in the story, because just to have the crit heals is just, it's just great. So I know there've been a lot of discourse on that. So, argue away in the comments if you want. Like, again, it's all subjective, but just from a purely, I guess, also a purely objective point of view, just having the buffs as well as the heal is just better than having a heal. All right, so enough about the bird and the cat. Let's get to the next unit, which is Yukimi. Now, Yukimi is a good sustain, but out of all the sustain units, I would actually probably drop Yukimi a bit lower because Yukimi's very niche in the fact that all she does is really give defense buffs. Can also obviously heal with the bless stacks and stuff like that, which is also very, very nice. But the heal is not going to be anywhere near Lufel and Morgana. So in that instance, it's a bit, it's a bit like meh. But in the instance of defense, it's also a little bit meh because you don't really need defense too much, because if you're slotting in a specific unit in order to buff your defense to keep you alive, then what's the point of slotting in a healer as well? You're basically double dipping and you're missing out on a significant portion of damage in the end game. And it's just not enough to justify putting in Yukimi over Lufel and Morgana, in my personal opinion. You could argue that Yukimi is a bit better than Morgana, as seen in this tier list. But again, that's just probably like arguments for argument's sake. Now, in saying that, Yusuke or Fox coming out soon is actually a defense scaling DPS unit and will work very, very well with Yukimi. Yukimi is actually probably the best in slot for Yusuke at this point in time. So if you are planning to pull for Yusuke, then, this value, I'm basing this on 1.0, but when Yusuke comes out, this value and this tier will probably shoot up a little bit just because it will be best in slot sort of sustain unit for Yusuke, just because every single, defense buff and stuff on Yusuke will increase Yusuke's damage. So I guess if you want to think about that in that point of view, then, Yukimi could probably rise up in the ranks a little bit. But at this point in time, 1.0, Yukimi is probably tier 1. It's probably fair. I'll probably move her down to tier 2 if I'm being completely honest. But tier 1, tier 2, basically the same thing. So, that's just my opinion on that matter. All right, next up is the support class, and I am going to be talking about my boy Leo. Now, Leo is super, super good. You should always be building Leo. Like, even if you just go the bossing in general, Leo is tier 1 for sure, strong and reliable. Still used in many, many teams these days. In fact, I would probably put Leo up into like 0.5 and 0 if I'm being completely honest. Leo is a universal buffer used in so many teams on other regions. Just basically so good. At A6, really, really good. At signature weapon, even at 4-star weapon, really, really good. You got buffs on buffs, you got additional buffs, you got power of friendship. The power of friendship, guys. Leo is a super good support unit, the best support unit in this game, and overall just really, really good. The only downsides in his kit, in my opinion, is that depending on how sort of you utilize it and your skill rotation, it's really only single target that you can be applying the buffs to. So that's why Leo is very well paired with Ryuji, for example. So in that instance, any sort of AoE or like global or group buff, Leo's probably not the best. I'll be talking about units afterwards that has probably filled that role. But in terms of just the buffing unit in general, Leo is really good. And realistically, you're only really running 1 DPS anyway. You don't really need any other units to be doing DPS if your main DPS is super strong. So yeah, Leo being at T0, 100%, just really, really, really good. Now, 0.5, you have Rin and Haruna or Riddle. Now my chat knows this. In my live streams, we know this a lot. I don't really like Riddle too much, and the reason being that I don't like Riddle too much is because if you sort of look in this instance, Riddle falls off quite hard. Now, and the reason being that Riddle falls off quite hard is basically just because there are other better buffing units or support units in the game that eventually will come out. But at this point in time, Riddle has global buffs, which basically means Riddle's buffs apply to everyone in the party, essentially. And they can do work. They can do a lot of work. And if they didn't do work, she wouldn't be used in all of the top 2,000 teams in SOS, for example. You can basically always see it's basically, Ren, Rin, Riddle, and then, whatever unit. But that's basically the 3 cores. And that's because, again, she just does a lot of buffing in terms of like a global sort of perspective. And just works really, really well in terms of, I guess, her buffs in general as well. And even though I don't personally like Riddle, and I probably won't build Riddle, I can definitely, recognize. I can definitely recognize that Riddle is definitely very, very good, especially for the current sort of SOS team base. Now, in saying that, Riddle eventually does move to a niche category, not necessarily like a really, really bad unit, for example, but very, very niche. So that's why, that's why I recommend my channel to really build Riddle too much. Just because, that doesn't really work well unless you're with Haru, I guess. And then with Haru, I guess you can work all right. But anyway, she becomes a really, really niche unit anyway. And then there's just better support units that eventually will come out. Whereas with like Leo, for example, I just feel like Leo is just kind of always at that, S tier sort of support ranking, whereas Riddles will drop down a little bit. And that's the same with Rin. Now, Rin, I absolutely love Rin. I absolutely adore Rin. I think Rin is one of the cutest characters in this game. I absolutely love her. Definitely best girl in this game for me. Now, with Rin, it's pretty much the same thing. At 1.0, she's definitely 0.5 or even 0 in my opinion, just because she pairs so well with Joker. Just in general, she pairs really, really well with Joker. She basically enables Joker. She also has, a forget when you have Mumpo's Soup. You can do additional damage with Mumpo's Soup, for example. And essentially, she just enables and does more damage with Joker, and then vice versa as well. And as a support unit for Joker, considering that Joker is a tier 0 DPS, like there's really not much else to say. But again, does fall off a little bit just because it only really works in curse-based teams. And currently Joker's really only the curse-based DPS. I know Barry's coming out soon, for example, or Barry's already out for CM, but coming out soon for Taiwan and Korea. But in 1.0, these two units are probably fair at 0.5 just because of the buffs that they give. And then Rin, obviously, with the curse basis in order to enable Joker to do further damage, for example. So the next one is I'm going to be mentioning is Moko. Now, again, just like with Riddle and just like that my chat knows, I don't really like Moko. Like, I like Moko's design and everything, but I don't really, really like using Moko. And I do think that Moko falls off significantly hard because, again, the same issue with Riddle. I just feel like, there's just better units out there to just do better buffs. But at this point in time, with A6 and her buffs in general, it's actually okay. It's okay. So if you don't have Riddle, for example, you can always slot in Moko, which will also do the additional sort of global buffs in terms of party-wide buffs with attack increases and stuff like that. So if you have that, and especially at A6, Moko can actually do some pretty good buffing, especially for, I guess, that curse team, especially on side 1 of SOS. But again, personally speaking, subjectively, I don't really think she's that great. In this 1.0 patch, same with Riddle, she's probably okay. But globally, eventually, she'll probably drop off quite hard. But for a 4-star unit, not bad to invest in, especially now. And also those, buffing units later down the line might come a bit later to global. So if you're just looking at units in 1.0 at the moment, this is probably a fair assessment on where they slot into the tiers. What's not fair, however, is Key. Now, I think if Arn is here at 0.5, I think Key should at least be tier 1. It's the same as Moko, just because Key, again, with the additional burn damage, can increase his damage, can also increase Arn's damage, for example, to do additional burn, and to do additional instances of burn, DOT burn. I feel like Key is the perfect support for Arn, and at A6, Key does actually surprisingly a lot of damage as well. I think this should be in tier 1. Tier 0.5 is probably a little bit meh, just because Arn is also, compared to Joker, for example, a bit meh. So I feel like Key being at tier 1 is definitely fair. Tier 2, I think that's a little bit harsh, if I'm being honest. He is, again, very, very niche. Only really works in burn teams. But, I mean, Rin is also kind of niche. Only really works in curse teams as well. So, I don't necessarily agree with this one. I think this one should be in tier 1. That's just my opinion. But basically, Key is also a very, very good support unit, especially for burn teams, especially considering that Arn is a 0.5 tier DPS. All right, now the next category and the last category we're going to be talking about is Navigators. Now, with Navigators, there's only really 2, and both, in my opinion, are tier 0, just because you need 2 Navigators in the game. But if we are talking objectively, then the one that does give you more damage bonus and damage increase will be objectively better, because obviously endgame with SOS and guild boss battles, that instance of more score is more important. And then that means Okian is definitely the one to go with at tier 0, just because she is the offense level Navi. But in saying that, I do actually think that Puppet at tier 0 is actually very, very good as well, just because she just keeps your team alive. And then with skill 3 as well, also gives you an attack buff as well. And, you know, you get some SP management and stuff like that. As you know, I think SP management is Okian. But you do get the attack buff, you get defense shields, for example, and you also get a knockdown shield as well. So, you know, if you're coming into a boss that is specifically targeting one of your units' weaknesses, just chuck that shield on that one unit, and then you'll be able to survive 2 turns without being knocked down, which is super good, which means the enemy won't be able to get the one more turn. But I think these 2 navis will be in T0, just because at this point in time, there's only 2 navis, and you need 2 navis to build 2 teams. But objectively speaking, Okian will be better, just because it's the more offensive leveled navi. But Puppet is very, very good, because you can basically be kept alive with Puppet. And to be honest, Puppet with Shun, you can definitely run a few sustainless teams or a few healerless teams, for example, because that will be enough to keep you alive, which obviously increases the value of other buffers and other supports as well. Yeah, so that's basically my opinions and my tier list. So I pretty much agree with Prydwen on everything here. I'll probably switch Morgana up into tier 1. Yukimi down to tier 2, probably switch Ki up into tier 1. But everyone else I think is quite fair. Maybe Puppet into tier 0, just because, again, there's only 2 navigators in the game. But essentially, looking forward, I think this will definitely change a lot. I think with Yui releasing, for example, Yui will probably be, because I assume with the SOS it will probably change as well. Same with guild battles to be electric affinity. Yui and Closer could move up in tiers, for example. But do they necessarily mean that they must sort of pull characters? Definitely not. I don't think Yui will last very, very long. Single target electric DPS. Personally, I don't think Yui is a worth pull anyway. However, we will be getting Marion. And Marion, as you can see, is a tier 0.5 sustain unit. And Marion is actually very, very, very good. And I highly, highly recommend that anyone who wants Marion to get Marion. But just don't forget that Marion will move over to the standard banner. So you can actually possibly get her with the selector. Not really sure yet, but you could get her. You can obviously get her in the regular pools as well. But Marion coming out in the next patch as well is super, super good. And then Marion will 100% just slot into tier 0, in my opinion, be one of the best sustain units just because of her kit in general, with the bless stacks and everything like that. And then the amount of healing that she can do. And then as well as the ult as well, with the amount of healing that she can do on the ult. Marion is a super, super solid sustain unit. So if we're just looking ahead briefly, some of this will probably change around, mostly not really. And then probably come back to all this stuff, I guess, when Queen comes out. So Queen and Yusuke come out. But mostly this tier 1, or at least for patch 1.x, this is probably the tier list that you're looking at. So it's not a bad tier list at all. I would obviously move a few units around, just as I said. But yeah, that's just my 1.0 tier list for Persona 5 the Phantom X at this current point in time. So if you enjoyed the video, definitely don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Definitely join the Gacha Rebels Discord as said below. Giveaway at 10,000 subscribers. So definitely make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And also, let me know in the comments about your tier list, what you think and what your opinions are. I definitely want to know for sure. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think I'm shit? Do you think I'm an absolute genius? What are your thoughts? I think generally this is a pretty good tier list for Prydwen. Again, at least for the global side, CNs probably can be argued. But yeah, I'll link this as well in the description for you guys to check out. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts and opinions are. And if you're enjoying Persona 5 the Phantom X at the moment, I'm super excited for the future of this game. And I really, really hope that no end of service. All right, thanks again for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.